In the realm of Tzeentch, anything is possible, except Warhammer fans getting laid and Imrik of Caledor dying. Well, that's a theory anyway. Played this matchup with Anticity in early access, knowing it would be very difficult for Tzeentch to deal with dragons and dragon princes, but that was with their very limited roster. They're better now, they have mortals, and so I wanted to try it again, see if Tzeentch has any tools that might allow them to fell the mighty beast. But fate had another twist in store for us, because there were some big-time mind games in terms of army composition, which made for a wild little scrap. I am hardly an expert on the Tzeentch vs High Elves matchup, but overall I'd say it favors the Azure, which is weird because Chaos is undeniably ridiculous right now, and the Immortal Editions pushed quite a few of their rosters into A and S tier. But the High Elves, despite their own problems and insanely expensive roster, have some innate advantages that are worth exploring against Tzeentch. And the big ones, of course, are Flame and Missile Resist, both of which Menaethmir and the Lord of Dragons have in bountiful supply. 25% Missile Resist, 40% Flame Resist, makes him essentially impossible to shoot, and the rest of his kit and combat stats lets him tear through armor and single entities in a multitude of ways. Imrik is a raid boss, and the Changer is rightly afraid when he shows up on Tzeentch's home court, but if we're talking about making Imrik literally unkillable, then he still needs healing. If you're investing in a 3,000 gold monster, the reality is you need to keep it alive or you're just going to lose. In the back we have the Fireborn, 40% flame resist on them as well, and this is about as elite as an army in multiplayer can possibly get. One thing was very clear, we thought we'd be facing Chaos Warriors and Chosen, because those are the best units outside of Spawn for killing a character like Imrik. Chosen Halberds, pretty good for killing dragons. They're exactly what Swordmasters and White Lions like to fight. But it was not to be. Mind games are afoot here, because Tzeentch built a very shooty demonic army, which is a fantastic counter to AP elite infantry spam, like White Lions and Swordmasters, but struggles in one very obvious area, killing Imrik. Still though, with Gaze of Fate from Kairos, lots of focus fire, magic missile spam, the weird spawn, and halberds chopping in, maybe Imrik can still die. And even if he is unkillable, if he doesn't have an army, he can certainly still route to army losses. So lots of interesting stuff to think about as these two armies square up for the SmackDown, but killing Imrik is going to be a challenge. Now, as someone who loves dragons, I know their limitations quite well after 6 years of playing with and against them, and it is very rare against any race that you can just kind of charge in with impunity, right? They are very unwieldy, and for a couple of years there at least, it was pretty common to see them never take off again once they landed, because they get pinned and murdered if they were in even remotely the wrong spot. The High Elves have very little fear of that right now. The worst thing that could happen is Gaze of Fate would net him in place for a few seconds, Chaos Warriors with halberds would close in and maybe get a few attacks in, then he would just pull away. I think you guys get the point. Imrik should have a field day here unless he is blundered heavily. But if we know anything about multiplayer, it's that battles rarely come down to a single unit. And if the rest of the army is getting poop diddlied on everywhere else, then a Star Dragon is unlikely to carry the day by itself, even as it frolics through a field of horrors. White Lion and Swordmaster spam would have been really good against a Chosen and Chaos Warrior core, which is the expected infantry counter to Imrik, but they find pendulums and shooting quite unpleasant to deal with, even when they can kind of dodge out of the way, even though they do have innate missile resist and missile block chance. So Swordmasters and White Lions are both going to try to get into those Chaos Warriors, because that's the juicy target right there. That's where their AP can really make a big impact. Fireborn don't have a lot of good options to charge into right now. Ideally, they'd actually probably be going after the weird spawn and counter-charging wherever the weird spawn are. They're more towards the center at the moment. But the Pure Main Company and Swordmasters of Hoeth are getting absolutely shellacked by all of this missile fire coming in from all different angles. And Kairos Fateweaver not going to make things any easier with his Penumbral Pendulums. Nice breath attack into the Chaos Warrior Halberds. Just another way Imrik and Menaethmir can swing momentum in the High Elves' favor. But with a dearth of good targets for Swordmasters and White Lions to cut through in melee, and the Weird Spawn being used very well amongst the fodder infantry of Tzeentch, the Azure are doing much more poorly in this grind than a heavy metal build like this one would typically expect. You would expect Swordmasters and White Lions to cut their way through demons no problem at all, but combined arms tactics have always been an important element of Total War, and Tzeentch has a much more balanced and rounded build, and it's paying huge dividends for them so far. A lot of pink and blue horrors in that back line, and so far, none of them have really been shut down, because the White Lions and Swordmasters just can't cut their way through. especially with a hammer and anvil from the Furies. Those Pyramid Company just evaporated, and that forced the Dragon Prince's hand. The Fireborn had to go into melee to staunch the bleeding in the center. Now, Swordmasters have somewhat rallied here, doing well against the Chaos Warriors with halberds. There are only 2 of those. Only 2 mortal units under the wings of Kairos Fateweaver. Imrik is busting open the Tzeentch left flank, and just now White Lines moving around the side might be able to get into those pink horrors if they do not retreat. Wisely, they are backing up and hoping to get a little bit of support, perhaps from Kairos himself, who has not activated any Gazes of Fate thus far, but there is our first one, and that should set up for a gorgeous Penumbral Pendulum and some point-blank volleys into the White Lions, who, again, do have some missile resistance, so they'll be able to weather some of those shots, but that was a great Pendulum and a fantastic way to shut down some of the pressure being applied on Tzeentch's back line. Swordmasters using the benefit of that tree cover, which blocked a lot of those shots and allowed them to survive what would have probably been a magical deluge that would have deleted them from the face of the earth. Tzeentch's magic missile raining down from above into the Fireborn, but all their stuff does fire damage, so I don't think the Fireborn care particularly much, and they have completely overwhelmed the pink horrors and are moving towards the blazing squealers, which, remember, do replenish ammunition of nearby friendly troops, so if you can keep them online and firing, they are going to put the hurt on all this infantry, and all of it is expensive, all of it is elite, all of it is exactly what an army like Tzeentch would want to shoot into given half the opportunity. Kairos Fateweaver was wise to flee in the face of Imrik's wrath. Fireborn are collapsing in, and the overshields for these horrors in the back line disappearing as the Dragon Elite make their mark in the rear. Kairos Fateweaver continues to spam overcast magic missiles into Imrik of Caledor, but he's shrugged off insane amounts of damage thus far. Seriously, the entire army was firing into him at one point, and he did not give a shit. Which is incredibly rare in this game, because we know how strong focus fire is in 99% of circumstances. It is very rare that a large single entity monster like that one can hope to stand in the fire arc of that many troops shooting in and not immediately get turned inside out. So Swordmasters and the remnants of a lot of this High Elf infantry are kind of moving in and out of combat, routing, coming back to the fold. They got riggedy wrecked at the start of this battle. Most of them died before they were even in combat for more than a couple of minutes. Weird Spawn were a big part of that. They're the reason the Pyramid Company are no longer with us. But just having bodies is really important for the High Elves right now, because Imrik needs a few meat shields at least to keep the Tzeentch army distracted, so he can do stuff like that, unleash with some Strawberry Milkshake breath attacks from above. Dragon Princes are tied down by Gaze of Fate. They're getting torn up, but they've retained most of their models, which means a regrowth from the Life Mage could get them back into fighting shape. Start out with an Earthblood, and that will put both her spells on cooldown, because she has already regrowth Imrik of Caledor, who is literally at full HP after all the damage he has sustained, after all the focus fire that has been sent his way. Now, the Weird Spawn have a full surround off right now, and if they could pin him down in place with their armor sundering, that could be huge, and really one of the only ways they could possibly kill the champion of dragons. But then here comes the Fireborn. Down the mountain they ride with lances ablaze, and bam, that's gonna hurt big time. Nice hammer and anvil into the rear of the iridescent horrors, into the back of those Weird Spawn, and should they become isolated and cut off from the rest of their army, then the Dragon Princes with their bonus versus large and incredible stats, no longer benefiting from martial mastery unless regrowth can get them back over half HP. But whether they have that stat boost or not, Chaos Spawn cannot hold out against a charge from Dragon Princes, and that is the unit that the High Elves really want to eliminate. Once the Weird Spawn are gone, then Tzeentch no longer has mass to keep Imrik tied down, and that means the rest of his horrors should start crumbling out. You see the bounce bar is beginning to swing in favor of the High Elves, who have lost tons of infantry. Looks like a regrowth will probably be sent the way of those Fireborn momentarily, if she has the Winds of Magic to unleash it. Book of Hoeth and the Starwood Staff should give her the Winds of Magic to do so. The Elves of Tor Elisor have lost all of their foot troops besides the Dragon Princes and the Mage. It's pretty much up to Imrik now. The veteran White Lions and the Swordmasters have all disappeared. Remnants of the Pyramid Company breaking towards the tree line. Big breath attack, not going to be an amazing one. Probably should have waited a couple more seconds for these units to be fixed in place by the charge of these Fireborn, who have been absolutely massively impactful in this battle. They've had some fantastic charges. They've eliminated the majority of the Weird Spawn, who are still supported by the Pink Horrors and Blazing Squealers in the midst of the throes of this melee combat. Kairos Fateweaver is untouched. His force field has kept him unscathed and largely ignored by the High Elves. I mean, what are you going to do with Kairos, right? Like, he is almost always going to be the last unit or model to die for Tzeentch, because you just have no way to actually catch him and kill him. He's too tanky, he's too fast, he's too survivable. There's no point in investing resources and going after a Lord like that, who can also heal himself up with regrowth. Swordmasters are back into the fray, dealing with those Blazing Squealers and the Pink Horrors of Tzeentch. White Lions are reinforcing. Now Imrik has the opportunity to duel Kairos Fateweaver in his Lord of Dragons debuff, lowering melee attack and melee defense, especially backed up by these Fireborn, who have a full surround off on the Lord of Change. That's going to be bad news bears for the Greater Demon of Tzeentch, even though Sundered Armor and Terror is kicking in for those Fireborn, and they're breaking towards the edges of the map, and we may not see them again. And frankly, I'm not sure it's even worth it for Imrik of Caledor to run after Kairos Fateweaver right now. Maybe want to just deal with the rest of this infantry. Scary thing about Kairos, though, all these veterans coming back to the fold around the Life Mage, they could easily get exploded by a single spell, and a Penumbral Pendulum could certainly be something to put them in the dirt for good, and at this point, I'm not sure it really matters. Kairos is not going to beat Imrik in a 1v1, and even though he is going to drop some spells, and they'll try to get out of the way in time, probably see some routing after that one. Terror Bomb coming in from the Lord of Change. He's still going to have to fight Imrik, and that is not combat that he can take and expect to survive. So, in terms of army composition, because we know this is a foregone conclusion at this point, it was a pretty interesting game. I fully expected Tzeentch to go heavy on the Chaos Warriors with Halberds, on the Chosen with Halberds, and to make a tanky front line backed up by Spawn, maybe a few Screamers in the air. Screamers of Tzeentch are not really utilized that much in at least domination by competitive players. They can be pretty good for messing up single entities, but I don't think they will perform overly well against Imrik of Caledor, especially because if they have aerial superiority, you can just land with them in and amongst your elite infantry. It was a strange build from the High Elves, there's no question about it. It's very rare that you see that much elite infantry without a lot of support, and what you saw there is pretty much why. But if you're expecting to see a bunch of armored elite halberds, then a White Lion and Swordmaster Corps makes a hell of a lot of sense, because you're going to be just getting insane trades and value trading the entire time you're fighting. Swordmasters into Chosen of Tzeentch, Swordmasters are loving that every day of the week, as long as they're not getting shot or exploded by spells, which of course is always a possibility when you're talking about Swordmasters who just have really tightly packed formations and get lobotomized by spells like Pit of Shades and Penumbral Pendulum. So, in expecting a full mortal build, these Swordmasters and White Lions made a lot of sense, but against a range-focused build like the one Tzeentch brought that had a lot of demons in it, they're not going to be that good. They're going to get shot to pieces, and that's what we saw here. They weren't terrible, but they didn't do great. What that exposed Tzeentch to, though, was the wrath of Imrik of Caledor and the Fireborn, who carried hard. Almost 3,000 damage value on those two units each. That's killing more than half of your army alone, and it can't really be overstated just how impactful those two units were. They carried the day for the Elves of Tor Elisor. And it's a perfect example of why I love playing multiplayer in this game. Army composition, building your army, employing certain strategies against certain types of builds. We saw how good that Tzeentch build was against the vast majority of the High Elf army, but there are certain units that you have to game plan for, and if you don't, you can be in trouble. And Imrik and the Fireborn demonstrated that here, and were literally unkillable.